He mocked her in front of everyone. The Admiral's tone was casual, cruel, the kind meant to remind everyone who held power in that room. "Lieutenant Wolfe," he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, "since this is your first time here, tell me, what's your call sign?" Laughter rippled across the table. She didn't join in. She stood still, eyes calm, posture razor straight. The kind of silence that doesn't beg to be filled. It demands it. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, cold, deliberate. "Iron Widow, sir." The laughter stopped instantly. A quiet fell so deep it felt physical, like the air itself froze. The Admiral's face drained of color. His fingers twitched against the folder in front of him. No one else in that room knew what the name meant, but he did. He stared at her as if he had seen a ghost. He had. The hum of the overhead light seemed to grow louder, filling the vacuum left by their silence. Every officer looked between the two, uncertain whether to speak or even breathe. The Admiral's jaw tightened, and he forced out a nervous chuckle, trying to reclaim control. "That's quite a name," he said. But his voice had lost its command. It trembled, betraying recognition and fear. She didn't answer. Her eyes didn't waver. There was no smugness, no satisfaction, only the quiet stillness of someone who had already seen death and found it unimpressive. Her uniform was spotless, her hair pulled back in the severe precision of discipline. And yet behind that calm exterior something burned, not anger, not pride, but something older, a memory. The Admiral's hand drifted toward the folder on his desk, a classified file marked Operation Black Halo. He hadn't seen that name in years. The last time he had, it was stamped over her picture with 3 letters, KIA. He'd signed it himself. He had written her death into the record, and now she stood before him, alive, unflinching, a living contradiction that turned his authority into ash. He looked up again, but she was already watching him, the same look as that night over the radio, the same steady defiance before the line went dead. For a moment, he could smell the smoke again, hear the screams, taste the dust of that forgotten desert. He remembered her last words before the signal cut. "If command won't send backup, I'll finish it myself." And she did. The Admiral's voice cracked as he spoke. You weren't supposed to—" He stopped. He couldn't even finish the sentence. She tilted her head slightly, not with arrogance, but with something closer to pity. "Permission to be dismissed, sir?" she asked quietly. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. As she turned to leave, her boots echoed against the marble, slow, deliberate, unhurried. The door closed behind her. Silence again. The Admiral exhaled, but his breath came out uneven. He pressed a shaking hand against the folder, eyes fixed on the word deceased. For years that name had been buried, erased, forgotten. But ghosts, it seemed, didn't stay buried forever. And in that cold briefing room, with the laughter long gone, every man who had once mocked her would remember the day the Admiral asked her call sign, and learned too late that legends sometimes wear living faces. The Admiral waited until the last footsteps faded down the hall. Only then did he reach for the folder. The classified seal tore with a dry crack, and the scent of old paper filled the room. His hands trembled as he flipped the first page. There she was, Lieutenant Mara Wolfe, call sign Iron Widow. The photo stared back at him like judgment itself. Same eyes, same defiance. He swallowed hard. The report was brief, clinical, detached. Unit compromised. Hostiles outnumbered 15-1. Lieutenant Wolfe presumed KIA following last radio contact. He stared at the signature at the bottom. His. It had been his pen that declared her dead. His order that pulled back air support. His silence that buried her name in an after-action report no one dared to question. The words blurred as memories rushed in. The gunfire, the flames, the last broken transmission before static. He remembered shouting into the headset, calling her name again and again until the line went dead. For months he told himself she didn't suffer. For years he believed it. But the way she looked at him today, calm, knowing, it told a different story. She hadn't died out there. She'd been left. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "How the hell did she make it back?" he muttered. The computer terminal blinked with her personnel file, recently reinstated, no details provided. Clearance level redacted. Even for an admiral, that was unusual. Someone above him had signed off her return, someone powerful enough to rewrite death. His gut twisted. This wasn't just a survivor. It was a secret. Outside, the harbor lights flickered on, their glow reflecting off the glass. He caught his reflection, older, heavier, eyes dulled by guilt he never confessed. Iron Widow, he whispered, testing the name like an old wound reopening. The title had once been whispered in mess halls, a legend of the woman who refused extraction, who held her ground alone. But no one ever expected the legend to walk back through the door. He stood, walked to the window, and stared at the ships below. Somewhere out there she was walking the deck again, alive, rebuilt, silent. What had she seen in those lost years? Who had brought her back? The questions dug into him like hooks. For the first time in decades, Admiral Hayes felt something he didn't recognize anymore. Not command, not control, fear. He turned back to the desk, eyes landing on the mission report. A faint annotation caught his attention, one he hadn't noticed before. A name scrawled in the margin in handwriting he didn't recognize. Truth doesn't die. It waits. His pulse quickened. Whoever wrote that had access to top clearance. He reached for the phone, but his hand froze. Outside the door, he heard the faint click of boots. Steady, deliberate, approaching once again. The knock came soft, controlled, almost polite. Admiral Hayes froze mid-step. The clock ticked once behind him, sharp and accusing. "Enter," he said, voice lower than before. The door opened, and there she was again. Lieutenant Mara Wolfe, the same unreadable calm, the same eyes that saw through rank. She stepped in, shutting the door gently behind her. The room suddenly felt smaller. "Sir," she said, standing at attention. Her voice was steady, emotionless, the voice of someone who'd learned not to flinch. "You wanted to see me?" Hayes nodded, motioning toward the chair across from his desk. "At ease, Lieutenant," he said. She didn't move. Her discipline was absolute, the kind forged from surviving what should have killed her. For a moment, he saw himself reflected in her stillness. The man he once was before guilt began to rot him. He reached for a red folder lying apart from the others, its edges worn, its corners marked with dust. "You know what this is?" he asked quietly. Her eyes flickered to it, then back to him. "I used to," she said. He opened it, spreading the contents across the desk. Photos, maps, reports, faces of men now gone, every one of them tied to Operation Black Halo. "We lost 12, he said. "But not you. You were—" He stopped. He couldn't bring himself to say, "supposed to be dead." Her gaze didn't waver. "You signed it, sir?" The words hit harder than any accusation. Hayes's breath caught. "You think I wanted to?" He snapped, then caught himself, lowering his tone. "I was following protocol. Gaman made that call." She nodded slowly, a faint bitterness in her smile. "And you obeyed." Silence followed, heavy, suffocating. For the first time, rank didn't matter. Only truth did. Hayes looked away, eyes fixed on the photo of a burned-out convoy. "You were gone," he whispered. "No signal, no extraction point. We waited as long as we could." Her jaw tightened, and her voice turned sharper. "You waited 6 hours. We fought for 23. The words cut through the air like shrapnel. He looked up, and for a brief moment he saw it. The pain beneath her control. The kind of pain that doesn't fade, only hardens. She stepped closer, resting a single sheet on his desk, a new document, fresh print, black seals across the top. "You weren't supposed to see this," she said. The header read, "Project Iron." His pulse spiked. "What is this?" he asked. "A mistake," she said softly. "One they buried with us." He flipped the pages, experimental field units, classified orders, covert funding lines. His hands began to shake. This wasn't just a mission gone wrong. It was a cover-up. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the overhead light. Finally, she said, "You want to make it right, sir? Then stop pretending it's over." Her tone wasn't defiant. It was weary, almost pleading. He looked at her and saw not a soldier, but a survivor carrying the weight of 12 ghosts. He nodded slowly, the resolve in his face returning after years of silence. "Then tell me everything," he said. For a long moment she said nothing. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the lights and the distant cry of a gull outside the window. Hayes waited, his eyes locked on her face. She wasn't just recalling a memory, she was reliving it. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, controlled, but each word carried the weight of years buried beneath silence. "It started at 0200 hours. We were sent to extract a local informant near Kandahar. Only there was no informant," Hayes frowned. "What do you mean, no informant?" She looked down at the papers on his desk. The photos, the coordinates, the signatures. "The intel was planted," she said quietly. "We walked straight into an ambush. They were waiting for us. Tanks, RPGs, drones, more firepower than a recon team should have ever faced. We were supposed to die there, Admiral. That was the mission." Her words struck him like a blow. He'd read the after-action report 100 times. It had never said this. She took a slow breath, her hands steady, though her voice trembled. "We lost radio contact within minutes. Command ordered fallback, but our evac point was compromised. I called for air support 3 times. No response. Then I realized..." She paused, the memory clawing at her composure. "They'd cut us off. Someone in our own chain pulled the signal." Hayes leaned forward, disbelief mixing with dread. "You're saying Command wanted you dead?" She met his gaze. "Not all of Command. Just someone high enough to make it look clean." The Admiral rubbed his temple, heart pounding. "That's impossible. I would have known." Her eyes hardened. "You signed the orders, sir." "Extraction denied. Authorization code RZ-47. His breath stopped cold. That was his code. He stared at her, stunned. "That code was secure. No one else had access." She nodded slowly. "Someone used your clearance to erase us, to bury the mission, and when they couldn't find the bodies, they finished the story for you. Killed on record, forgotten in reality." The room felt smaller now, the air heavy with guilt and revelation. Hayes gripped the edge of his desk, trying to steady his hands. "How did you make it out?" he asked finally. Her eyes drifted, unfocused, as if staring into the flames of that night. 6 of us made it to the ridge. 2 were wounded. By sunrise it was just me. I crawled 5 miles through sand and shrapnel until a local farmer found me. I spent 2 years in the hills under a different name. The world thought I was gone. I let it. Her voice softened. "Some ghosts have work left undone." Hayes sat back, his chest tight, his throat dry. "Why come back now?" he asked. She looked up, eyes dark with something deeper than anger. "Because the same people who sent us there are still in uniform, and they're planning something worse." She pulled a small drive from her pocket and placed it on his desk. "This holds everything. Names, orders, accounts, but I can't access it without your clearance." The Admiral stared at it, then at her. He understood what it meant, a choice. A line he could no longer avoid crossing. Outside, thunder rolled across the harbor. The storm was coming, slow but certain. Hayes reached for the drive, feeling its weight. Small, metallic, yet heavier than any medal he'd ever worn. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "if what you're saying is true, this could end careers, end lives." She nodded once. "It already has." The words hung between them like smoke, thick and inescapable. For the first time, Hayes realized the war she'd survived wasn't over. It had just changed uniforms. The storm hit just after midnight. Rain battered the command windows, thunder rolling over the harbor like distant artillery. Admiral Hayes sat alone in his office. The lights dimmed, the room lit only by the glow of his computer screen. The drive lay before him, small, silver, waiting. His finger hovered over the port. For years, he'd buried ghosts under paperwork and silence. Tonight, one of them had come back asking to be heard. He inserted the drive. The screen flickered. A login prompt appeared. Top clearance required. Hayes hesitated, then entered his code. The cursor blinked, paused, then unlocked with a faint chime. Dozens of files appeared. Operations, transactions, covert transfers. The deeper he went, the darker it became. Hidden programs linked across branches, code names he'd never seen. And there, in a red-marked folder, one word that froze him cold, WidowNet. He opened it. Inside were communication logs, encrypted orders, and field reports signed by names he knew. Admirals, colonels, politicians. They weren't dead. They were networked. A covert branch using off-the-books missions, human testing, and false deployments. Operation Black Halo wasn't a failure, it was a prototype. His heart sank as he scrolled further. There, under command authorization, was his own signature again, copied, forged, used to fund missions he'd never approved. Hayes stood, pacing, his pulse hammering in his ears. "My God," he whispered. "They've built an army inside the Navy." He tapped another file, a roster. Faces flickered on screen. Soldiers listed as missing, presumed dead. But they weren't. They were being moved, reassigned, erased, and at the top of the list was her name, Wolf Mara A., active under Phantom Directive. He froze. "She's part of it," he breathed. Or she was. The room seemed to tilt beneath him. A sudden beep cut through the silence, an alert flashing across the screen. Unauthorized access detected. His stomach dropped. Someone was watching the same files. He yanked the drive free, but it was too late. The screen went black. Then a message appeared. Just 3 words. "We see you." He backed away, eyes scanning the dark window. For a second, he saw a reflection behind him, a shadow, faint and unmoving. But when he turned, the room was empty. Rain lashed against the glass as he steadied his breath. He knew what this meant. The network wasn't just digital. It was alive, organized, and inside his command. The Admiral closed the blinds, locked the door, and reached for the secure line. "Control, this is Hayes," he said, voice firm. "Initiate internal security lockdown, level crimson." Silence. Then static. He tried again. Nothing. They'd already cut him off. He sank into his chair, the weight of the truth pressing down. Every protocol he'd trusted, every order he'd given, compromised. The Navy he'd devoted his life to had been infected from within. And now, somewhere out there, the one soldier who could expose it all was walking into their reach again. He looked down at the darkened screen and whispered, "God help us. They're hunting her." The storm had passed by dawn, but the base felt colder, quieter, as if the air itself knew something had shifted. Admiral Hayes hadn't slept. The drive was gone, locked in a secure case, but the words, "We see you," still burned in his mind. He stood by the window, staring at the grey morning light, watching the patrol boats drift like ghosts across the harbour. Somewhere out there, Mara Wolf was already moving. And now, so were they. By soon 700 hours, the reports started coming in. Scrambled data logs, missing personnel files, a silent breach in the communications hub. The system purge was precise, surgical. Every trace of WidowNet was being erased. Someone high up had flipped the kill switch. Hayes called for Lieutenant Wolf's location. "She's off-grid, sir," replied the tech. "No GPS, no comms, no trace." He knew what that meant. She'd gone dark and again. Not to hide, but to hunt. He moved through the corridor, medals gleaming faintly under the fluorescent light. Every salute he received felt hollow now, gestures from a structure built on lies. When he reached the operations wing, 2 military police officers were waiting. "Admiral Hayes," one said, "command requests your presence, immediately." His gut tightened. The tone wasn't a request. It was a summons. He followed. The echo of his boots, the only sound in the long, sterile hallway. They led him into a room he hadn't seen in years. Small, windowless, lined with monitors. Inside sat 3 men in black uniforms with insignias he didn't recognize. The one in the center spoke without looking up. "You accessed restricted archives last night," he said. "You used your clearance on a compromised drive." Hayes met his stare. "I was investigating an internal breach." The man smiled faintly. "You were the breach!" The words landed like a verdict. Hayes straightened. "If you think I'm going to sit here and watch you bury this—" The man cut him off. "Admiral, you've served long enough to know how this works. Some missions stay buried because the world isn't ready for the truth." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was Hayes's service record, redacted. At the bottom, stamped in crimson, "Disavowed." Hayes's breath caught, his entire career erased in one motion. He looked up. "You can't just—" "We already did," the man said calmly. They stood, leaving him alone with the file. The room felt airless, suffocating. For the first time in decades, Richard Hayes was no longer an admiral, just a man, stripped of power, holding the evidence of his own undoing. He stared at the word disavowed until the letters blurred. Then slowly he smiled, not with defeat, but understanding. They'd taken his command, but not his conscience. And if they were burning the truth to ashes, he would light his own match. Outside, the base sirens wailed, not alarms, but departure signals. A convoy was preparing to leave. He looked to the horizon, where the sky was breaking open into pale sunlight. Somewhere beyond it, she was out there, still fighting the war they'd both been ordered to forget. He whispered her name once, Mara, and turned away. The network thought they'd silenced him. They were wrong. He was done following orders. The base slept under a pale sky, but Admiral Hayes, stripped of his rank, name, and command, was already gone. Before dawn, he'd walked out of his office for the last time, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a memory stick. His badge no longer opened doors, yet every camera he passed turned away for reasons he didn't question. Somewhere, someone still loyal had overridden the system. Loyalty, it seemed, was not completely dead. He drove without direction, the highway stretching endlessly across the coast. Each mile took him further from the uniform that once defined him, and closer to the truth he could no longer ignore. When the phone on the seat beside him vibrated, he froze. No number. Just a single word flashing across the screen. "Widow." He answered. No greeting, no hesitation. Just her voice, calm and quiet. "They came for you, didn't they?" "Yes," he said. "And they'll come for you next." There was a pause, the faint crackle of wind on the line. "They already did," she replied. His grip tightened on the wheel. "Where are you?" Another pause. "You don't want to know, sir. But if you're calling to help, stop. They'll trace you." Hayes glanced at the mirror. A black SUV had been behind him for 10 miles. "Too late," he said, voice low. "They already have." He swerved off the main road, cutting into an abandoned airfield. The SUV followed, headlights slicing through fog. "Mara," he said, breath steady, "I need your coordinates. I've seen the files. The network is active. You're not just a target, you're the key." Silence. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. "Then listen carefully. You want to bring them down? You'll have to vanish first." The call ended. Hayes threw the phone onto the passenger seat and gunned the engine. The chase was brief but brutal. Tires screeched across cracked pavement. The first bullet shattered his rear window. Hayes didn't flinch. Years of combat reflexes took over. He hit the brakes hard, spun the wheel, and the SUV overshot, crashing into a hangar wall. He stepped out, chest heaving, rain beginning to fall again. In the wreck's glow, he saw the insignia on their shoulders. No Navy crest. Private. Black contracts. Hired ghosts. He opened the back of his car and pulled out a secure comms case, his final connection to the system that had turned on him. Typing fast, he transmitted one encrypted message into the void. Ghost protocol engaged. Target WidowNet. Asset Iron Widow active. The words blinked once, then vanished. Somewhere out there, a network of quiet allies, old soldiers, forgotten agents, people who owed him nothing, would know what it meant. The war had gone underground. As dawn bled across the horizon, Hayes climbed back into the car and stared east. "You wanted me disavowed," he murmured. "Now I'm free." He turned the key, the engine roared to life, and he drove toward the light. In another city, far beyond radar, Mara Wolf received the same coded transmission. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a faint smile. The fight was no longer hers alone. The hunt for the truth had just begun. The storm broke at dawn over an abandoned listening post buried deep in the Alaskan frontier. Inside, the hum of dormant servers echoed through frost-stained walls. Mara Wolf moved like a ghost through the ruin. No insignia, no rank, no past. Her uniform was gone. Only the call sign remained. Iron Widow. She laid a hand on a rusted console, wiped away dust. and the machine flickered to life for the first time in 12 years. She'd built this system once and buried it when she walked away. A single access prompt blinked on screen. Command authorization, Hayes 01. She stared at it for a long moment. Her reflection fractured across the frozen glass. "He found the key," she whispered. The files she'd hidden weren't tactical or strategic. They were personal. Every mission she led, every death she carried, every order she disobeyed was buried here. And in the heart of that archive, one secret bound her fate to the Admiral's, the truth about Operation WidowNet. 12 years earlier, she'd been ordered to lead a covert strike to dismantle a rogue network funneling US intelligence to private contractors. What no one knew, not even the Admiral then, was that WidowNet had been sanctioned from within. When she uncovered it, Command branded her a traitor. They erased her record, forged evidence, and staged her death in the Baltic Sea. The man who'd signed those orders, Admiral Hayes himself, he'd done it to protect the system. She'd vanished to destroy it. Now, as the console streamed encrypted data, the pieces began to align. The men chasing Hayes weren't acting on betrayal. They were executing cleanup orders from the same hidden chain of command. The system that had erased her was still operational, more powerful than before. And now, for the first time, it had made a mistake. It had tried to silence both of them. Her pulse steadied. "Then it ends tonight," she said quietly, typing a new command. "Reactivate WidowNet. Manual override." Across the screen, code scrolled like falling rain. Servers booted in sequence, lights flickering on across the old base. She watched as dormant satellites realigned, drawing power from long, silent grids. The network she'd once buried in shame was rising again, not as a weapon, but as proof. Proof of everything they'd done. In the corner of the room, a single terminal unlocked. It bore a message time-stamped just minutes ago. "Incoming from Hayes." 3 words appeared. "I remember everything." For the first time in years, she felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, not rage, but recognition. He had found his way back. The man who'd once condemned her was now the only one who could help her end it. The past was no longer a chain. It was a code. She entered her final command. Ghost protocol accepted. WidowNet integrity 74%. The lights dimmed, the system stabilized, and outside the storm began to break. Somewhere beyond the horizon, she knew the Admiral was on his way. The reckoning was near. The cabin was silent, except for the slow crackle of burning wood. Admiral Hayes sat by the window, a ghost reflected in the glass. The road behind him was erased by snow, but the echoes of his past followed close. His uniform hung over a chair, stripped of color, stripped of power. In his hand, the same data stick Mara had once built a life around. It pulsed faintly with encrypted light, like a heartbeat refusing to die. He knew what it held, and he knew what it cost. For years he'd told himself he'd done the right thing, that sacrificing one soldier to protect the mission was the price of command. But now, alone, the lie no longer held. He remembered the night of her death notice, the staged explosion, the falsified footage, the orders he'd signed without reading twice. Back then, he believed he was protecting the Navy from scandal. Now he saw it for what it was. Protection for the men who built the very network she tried to expose. He poured whiskey into a steel cup, but his hand trembled. Leadership had always demanded composure, but the ghosts didn't care about composure. They came anyway, faces of the lost, voices of the silenced, and among them always hers. "Iron Widow," he whispered. It wasn't just a call sign. It was a sentence, the name they gave her after she refused to die quietly. The name he'd let them use when he should have defended her. The name that haunted him through every promotion that followed. A soft beep broke the silence. His satellite communicator blinked to life, a single incoming message. He hesitated before opening it. "Data relay online. WidowNet active. Your turn." No greeting, no name. But he knew the tone. She was alive and she was ready. Hayes stared at the screen, guilt heavy as the storm outside. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black envelope. the one he'd carried since that night. Inside, her original mission order unsigned. He'd kept it all these years, proof of what he'd refused to admit. He placed the envelope on the table, slid the data stick beside it, and spoke into the communicator. "Mara," he said quietly, "if you're hearing this, I owe you the truth." He paused, breath heavy. "It wasn't the Navy that buried you. It was me. They said you'd gone too far. They said you'd compromised the chain. And I believed them. I didn't check. I didn't fight. I was their weapon, not their leader." The silence that followed felt like a trial, one he had already lost. Lightning flashed outside. His voice steadied. "You once told me that honor isn't about the uniform. It's about the choice to stand when no one else will. I finally understand what you meant." He looked down at the stick, at the last piece of his career, the first act of his redemption. "So this is me standing." He pressed upload. The system began to hum, data flowing into the WidowNet's secure channels. Files long buried, orders, signatures, bank transfers, resurfaced like bodies from deep water. The truth was leaving the shadows. He leaned back, eyes closed, exhaustion written across his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The communicator stayed silent, but a faint echo returned a few seconds later. Her voice, calm, steady, almost forgiving. "Then help me finish it." He looked out the window, where the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds. The storm was lifting. Somewhere beyond the snow, Iron Widow was waiting, and for the first time, the Admiral wasn't running from her. He was coming home to the truth. Night fell heavy over the coast, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound. Deep beneath the surface of an abandoned naval relay station, servers began to pulse with blue light. Mara Wolf stood in the cold glow, eyes locked on the monitors, as lines of code rippled upward like rising smoke. The files Admiral Hayes had unleashed were flooding through global nodes, bypassing firewalls built by the very men who had once erased her. Every truth she'd buried was clawing its way back into daylight. The screen showed a list of encrypted names, senators, admirals, defense executives, all tied to the same covert contracts under WidowNet's hidden signature. She read them in silence, each one another ghost from her past. 12 years of exile, of being hunted, of silence, all for this moment. Her heart didn't race, it slowed. Precision, not emotion, guided her hands. She had waited too long for anger. What she felt now was clarity, sharp as steel. The time for silence was over. Alarms began to flash across the upper deck. The network had detected a breach. Not hers, but theirs. "They're tracing the upload," she murmured, fingers flying across the console. Lines of defense collapsed one by one. Then, without warning, the central feed flickered to life, a live visual feed from command. The face on the screen was older, crueler, and painfully familiar. Admiral Vance, the man who'd ordered her erased. He smiled. "You should have stayed dead, Lieutenant Wolf." She didn't flinch. "So should you." The connection cut, replaced by a swarm of security alerts. They were coming. Mara moved through the server chamber, pulling drives, slipping data cores into her pack. Every file was a weapon, truth sharper than bullets. Above her, the hum of helicopters broke through the storm. She glanced once at the ceiling as dust fell from old steel beams. Then she activated the failsafe, total data broadcast in 300 seconds. If she fell here, the world would still see what she'd uncovered. The doors blew open. Tactical lights cut through the dark, sweeping across the room. Mara ducked behind a console, the old instincts taking over. But there was no fear now, only purpose. The first soldier stepped into the light. She moved before he could aim. Silence swift and efficient. The seconds ticked down. 240, 180, 120. A bullet grazed her shoulder, spinning her into the console. She gritted her teeth, slammed her palm on the final switch. The entire grid roared awake. WidowNet's last transmission going global. From Washington to London, from Sydney to Ottawa, the data storm hit every secure channel simultaneously. Classified files flooded the open net. Names and crimes etched into history forever. The storm had gone digital and the truth was unstoppable. In the final seconds, Mara looked up at the flickering monitors, her reflection caught between lines of code. "You wanted a ghost," she whispered. "You got one." Then the blast tore through the station, light swallowing everything. The widow had awakened, and the world would never forget her again. Morning broke like judgment. Across continents, screens lit with the same words, "Widow Net exposed." News anchors spoke in clipped disbelief, their voices trembling beneath breaking graphics. Secret operations, offshore accounts, falsified combat records, all of it was out. The world's most secure institutions, gutted from within by a single act of defiance. The truth had escaped its cage, and there was no bringing it back. What began as whispers in the military corridors became headlines screaming across every capital. In Washington, the Pentagon went into lockdown. The president's advisors scrambled to contain the damage, but the files kept spreading, mirrored by thousands of users worldwide. Every attempt to shut it down only made it stronger. In London, Parliament members demanded answers. In Sydney and Ottawa, high-ranking officers resigned before the hearings even began. The world had seen behind the curtain, and it didn't like what it found. The widow's hand had reached across oceans. Admiral Hayes watched it unfold from a quiet hospital room. His arm was bandaged, his face pale, but his eyes were alive for the first time in years. The doctors called it exhaustion. He knew it was release. On the small television across from him, the same name scrolled again and again, Iron Widow. They'd turned her into a headline, a symbol, a myth. The networks debated her morality, questioned her methods, even doubted her existence. But the old soldiers watching at home knew better. They saw justice. He turned the volume down and stared at the snow outside. Somewhere in that chaos, Mara Wolf's signal had gone dark. No body recovered, no trace found, just static. Officially, she was gone again. Unofficially, he wasn't so sure. He'd seen that blast, seen what she'd built. If anyone could survive that kind of ending, it was her. She didn't die quietly. She vanished with purpose. And that purpose, he suspected, wasn't finished yet. By the week's end, hearings began. Names once spoken with reverence now echoed in disgrace. Hayes was called to testify, not as a scapegoat, but as the man who'd set the truth free. He walked into that chamber without medals, without rank, without armor. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. But when the microphone went live, he spoke only one sentence: "The greatest betrayal is silence." The room fell silent. In that pause, something shifted. A weight, 12 years heavy, finally lifted. That night, as he left the capital, a plain envelope waited on the seat of his car. No stamp, no signature. Inside, a single photo, a silhouette standing on a pier at dawn. The same call sign etched in the corner, Iron Widow. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belonged to ghosts who finally found peace. The world had changed, but some legends, he knew, didn't need recognition. They just needed to be remembered. And as the city lights reflected off the river, the story of the widow lived on, not in records, but in resolve. Months passed, but the storm never truly faded. The Navy had survived the scandal, though stripped of its illusions. Commanders who once spoke in certainty now measured their words in truth. Inside the academy halls, portraits were quietly replaced. The old guard had fallen, and a new creed began to rise, one born not from power, but from accountability. It wasn't loud, it wasn't glorious, but it was real. And Admiral Hayes, once disgraced, now quietly reinstated, became its unlikely architect. He refused promotion. He refused medals. His only condition for returning was simple: no cover-ups, no ghosts. They called it naive. He called it leadership. Every week, he lectured a new class of cadets about courage, not as a slogan, but as a choice. "You don't serve a flag," he would tell them, "you serve the truth beneath it." Some called him cynical, others called him broken, but those who listened understood the weight behind every word. They saw the man who'd faced the mirror and chosen to rebuild, not forget. In the evenings, he walked the docks alone. The sea carried the same sound it had on the day everything ended, low, endless, and cold. He found comfort in it. The waves didn't judge. They simply returned, again and again, like duty itself. Sometimes he'd stop at Pier 47, where the wind cut hardest, and stare at the horizon. That was where the photo in the envelope had been taken. The same pier, the same light. He never spoke of it, but the memory kept him grounded, a reminder that some debts are repaid in silence. One night, a young ensign approached him, fresh-faced, nervous, curious. "Sir," he asked, "was the widow real?" Hayes looked out over the dark water before answering. "She was more than real," he said softly. "She was necessary." The ensign frowned. "Will we ever find her?" Hayes smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides more truth than words can carry. "If we do, I hope she's somewhere the world can't reach her." The young man nodded, though he didn't understand, not yet. Someday he would. As the years turned, her story became legend, a ghost tale whispered among recruits. They said she still watched the oceans, intercepting signals, protecting the system she once destroyed. No proof, no record, just faith. And sometimes, when a breach alert flickered unexpectedly across the Navy's grid, someone would joke, "The widow's awake." But those who knew Hayes never laughed. He would just close his eyes, let the silence stretch and whisper, "Then the seas are still safe." On his final day in uniform, Hayes walked out of command one last time. The sun was rising over the harbor, the same cold light breaking through clouds. He stopped at the flagpole, hand resting on the worn metal, eyes bright with something like peace. "You were right," he murmured. "Honor isn't what they give you. It's what you refuse to lose." The wind caught his words, carrying them out across the water, where somewhere unseen, the Iron Widow listened. And for the first time the echo answered. Far north, beyond the Arctic line, a lone signal pulsed through the storm. It was faint, coded, nearly invisible, but not lost. In a small outpost carved into the ice, a woman moved between dimly lit consoles, her movements steady, deliberate. The world believed her gone, but the sea never gave up what it wished to keep. Mara Wolf had survived. The scars on her shoulder told the story her records never would. The blast had ended one war, but in its ashes she found a new mission, one without rank, one without orders. Her hair was streaked with silver now, her face marked by years the world had stolen. Yet her eyes remained the same, sharp, cold, and alive with purpose. The network she'd rebuilt was smaller now, leaner, quieter. No headlines, no trails. She called it the Silent Network. Its members weren't soldiers or spies. They were whistleblowers, medics, and field agents, people who'd chosen truth over comfort. She didn't lead them. She guided them. From the shadows, the widow watched, and the world kept turning unaware. On her screens, alerts flickered from across the globe, corrupted field orders, blacklisted pilots, falsified casualty reports. She intercepted, corrected, erased the lies before they could take root. Justice no longer needed noise. It needed precision. Every keystroke was a quiet act of defiance, a small redemption carved from betrayal. The old WidowNet had been built to expose corruption. The new one existed to prevent it. No glory, no recognition, only service to those still bound by their oaths. At times, when the long nights grew still, she would pause and listen. The wind outside carried echoes, radio fragments, ghost signals, old frequencies from a world that no longer existed. Among them, she sometimes caught a familiar tone, Hayes's old command frequency, long decommissioned. She never responded, never broke the silence, but when she heard it, she allowed herself a faint smile. He had kept his promise. The seas were still safe. The system, at last, had learned to watch itself. Her newest recruit, a young cryptologist from Norfolk, sent a coded report that morning. A supply ship had gone missing in the Baltic. The coordinates were hauntingly familiar. Mara leaned back, exhaling through the silence. Some ghosts never stayed buried. She loaded her field gear, compact, precise, the habits of an old soldier who never forgot. "Not yet," she whispered. The mission wasn't over. It had simply changed form. She sent one final message across the secure channel. Iron Widow, active. Outside, the snow thickened, swallowing the outpost from sight. The light from her monitors flickered, fading into the storm. The world would never know her name again, and that was how she wanted it. True service didn't demand recognition. It demanded endurance. As the signal vanished into the sky, a quiet pulse followed it, a heartbeat in code, traveling through satellites, bouncing across oceans. Somewhere deep in the data stream, her message repeated endlessly, soft but unbroken. Honor lives. It had been 6 years since the world had last spoken the name Iron Widow. History had folded her into myth, an echo whispered only among veterans and analysts who still believed in ghosts. Admiral Hayes, retired now, older, slower, but still sharp, lived by the coast in Maine. His world had shrunk to a porch, a kettle, and the sound of gulls. Yet every dawn he checked one thing before coffee: the old encrypted radio, sitting by the window, tuned to a frequency no one else remembered. The device hadn't made a sound in years. Dust covered its dials, rust crawled along its frame, but he never turned it off. Habit, maybe, or hope. Some mornings he laughed at himself for keeping it alive. Other mornings he felt the silence pressing on him like a heartbeat waiting to return. That winter, when the blizzard rolled in from the Atlantic, the radio finally broke its vow. A faint click, then static, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. His hands froze mid-motion. It was Morse. He reached for the notebook he hadn't opened in a decade. The pattern repeated, steady and clear. Then silence. He stared at the page, breath caught in his chest. It wasn't random. It was the code they'd built together during WidowNet's first days. Their silent acknowledgement that a mission had ended. Translation: all clear. He sank back in his chair, the kettle whistling in the background, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Outside, the snow blurred the horizon, the sea vanishing into white. He knew she was out there somewhere, maybe in the Arctic stations, maybe beneath a new name, maybe gone for good. It didn't matter. She'd survived long enough to see the world stand on its own. That was enough. He poured his tea, raised it slightly toward the window, and whispered, "Good hunting, widow." The wind carried the words out to sea, scattering them like ashes. That night, he opened his journal, not for the Navy, not for history, but for himself. He wrote one final entry: some wars end with silence. Some heroes never come home. But as long as someone remembers why they fought, they never truly vanish. He closed the book, placed it beside the radio, and turned off the lamp. The storm raged outside, but inside there was peace, the kind born from truth finally told. In the dark, the radio light blinked once more, one soft pulse, almost human. Then it went still. The sea sighed against the shore, endless, unbroken. And somewhere far beyond reach, a woman watched from the edge of the world, her signal fading into the aurora above. The last transmission had been sent. The Iron Widow's watch was over. Years passed. The files faded from headlines, the scandals rewritten, the names replaced. But somewhere deep in the unclassified corners of history, her story remained. Not in textbooks or documentaries, but in the whispered respect of those who'd served. They never spoke her name openly, only her call sign, Iron Widow. To the world, she was a rumor. To those who understood sacrifice, she was something else entirely. Proof that truth has a voice, even when it comes from the shadows. Admiral Hayes passed quietly one autumn morning, the tide low and the air still. They found him seated on his porch, journal open, pen still in hand. His final entry was short, only 4 words. Honor outlives us all. The Navy buried him without ceremony at his request. Yet days later, a sealed file arrived at the Defense Archive, untraceable, unsigned. Inside, his confession, her data, and the truth behind WidowNet. It wasn't an exposure. It was preservation. History finally set free. Across the sea, a remote monitoring station blinked to life. The same Arctic storm, the same endless horizon. A single encrypted signal pulsed once, then faded. The transmission contained no message, no data, only coordinates. A memorial buoy was later found drifting there, painted black, with one line carved into its side. Some wars are fought without witnesses. The origin was never confirmed, but those who read it knew. She was still watching, still guarding, still there. In the years that followed, naval cadets studied the WidowNet case as a lesson in ethics, not in defiance, but in integrity. The lecture ended the same way each year, with the same line from Hayes's recovered journal. Courage is not obedience. Courage is remembrance. And when the lights dimmed, the students always fell silent, not out of fear, but reverence. Because for a generation raised on loyalty and loss, Iron Widow wasn't a myth. She was the reminder that even ghosts can keep the peace. Somewhere beyond the reach of governments and names, the northern lights burned across the sky, ribbons of color over a frozen world. Beneath them, a small outpost glowed faintly through the snow. Inside, a woman sat by a console, her hair silver, her eyes steady. She watched the transmissions pass, unmarked and endless. When the system confirmed its last secure link, she smiled softly and whispered, "All clear." Then she turned off the monitor, letting darkness reclaim the room. The mission was finally done, and as the wind carried her voice into the frozen night, it became something larger. A reminder for those who still believed in quiet heroism. Some battles never make the news. Some victories are never celebrated. But courage, the kind that endures without witness, is what keeps the world from falling apart. So if you've ever known someone who stood for what was right when no one else would, remember them. Share their story, because heroes like her never die. They just fade into legend. Wherever you are watching from, the US, the UK, Canada, or Australia, tell us below, have you ever met someone who lived with that kind of quiet courage? And if you believe that some heroes deserve to be remembered, share this story. Let the Iron Widow live on.